Welcome again, one and all, to another episode of Dynamic Destruction on Grudge Match, the show where the top contenders of the big two comic companies are taken from their universes to neutral territory to go one-on-one for our amusement. Today's contest brings together two walking, talking plants with some serious power to put their foliage to the test against one another. From DC, the avatar of the green, it's Swamp Thing, and from Marvel, the plant-based bruiser of the Guardians of the Galaxy, it's Groot. The comparisons are clear between these two chlorophyll cronies, obvious similarities in appearance and power sets, and though their origins do differ, they also share a similarity in not being the original version of their character. So let's look at them individually and start with Swamp Thing. The current Swamp Thing is known as Alec Holland, and he was first created in 1972, but he wasn't the original version of the character. That was created a year earlier, 1971, and that was Alex Olsen. So even though they have similar names and were created relatively close together, they are two different characters. But the most prominent and current Swamp Thing is Alec Holland. Now, his origin is that he was a scientist who was working on plant material in a swamp location, and thugs burst in wanting to destroy his research. They set a bomb, and they roughed him up pretty good, so he was doused in an experimental formula he was working on. When the bomb went off, he was caught in the explosion, and he was caught on fire, and he jumped into the swamp to put it out. The reaction of the fire and the experimental formula and Alec Holland's body in the swamp all caused his consciousness to transfer into the plants of the swamp, thus turning him into Swamp Thing. In addition to having that particular origin, he was also chosen to be the avatar of what is known as the Green. Now, in the DC universe, the Green is the life energy that is imbued and surrounds all plant life in the universe. There's also a red, which is the energy that permeates through all animal creatures, and then there's also the gray, which is an energy source that symbolizes death, decay, and rot. So Swamp Thing is the avatar of the Green, and as such, he is empowered with many plant-based abilities. Among those include enhanced superhuman strength and durability in his plant-based body. Also, body manipulation. He can grow different plant structures and appendages off of his body, and size alteration, capable of growing to mammoth heights. Also, general plant control. Any plants in the vicinity he can control to either cause them to move on their own, seemingly, or to have them grow, vines and whip-like tendrils popping up from the ground to attack his enemies. And he can also project his consciousness into whatever plants he wishes, an extension of his conscious transfer that went from his body into the plants of the swamp upon his origins. So this allows him to move very quickly to any point on the planet just by projecting his consciousness into whatever plant life happens to be in the area he wishes to go. It also allows him to easily jump from body to body, so if his body that he's in is damaged or destroyed, he can quickly jump to another one without problem. So this has made him an incredibly potent and powerful character, and he's had several collisions with some of the major characters of DC Comics. As the main avatar of the Green, he factors into some of the biggest and most important clashes in the entire DC universe. Groot of Marvel Comics, the Groot we are all familiar with, was first created in 2007, but he wasn't the original Groot. The first Groot, also sometimes known as King Groot, was first created way back in 1960, and he was a villainous character. But the Groot that we know is not that same character, they just happen to come from the same planet, which is Planet X. All the sentient plants on Planet X are known as Flora Colossi, and Groot is one of those. They all also happen to go by the name Groot, so it can be very difficult to distinguish them from one another. But the original Groot from 1960 is still around. He stays in permanent giant size, and he sometimes resides on Monster Island with some of the other giant monstrous creatures of that location. But the Groot that we're more familiar with was first created in 2007 as a character who it was included in the Annihilation Conquest crossover. So his backstory is that on Planet X, a planet where there are several of these Flora Colossi who are sentient trees and plant-based creatures, Groot always gravitated more towards the mammals and animal creatures of his planet, who were looked down upon by the more powerful plant-based creatures. So he always liked the animals more than his own kind, and for that, and for standing up for them, he was exiled from his homeworld. He wound up eventually falling into the events of Annihilation Conquest, where he was drafted into a team that eventually went on to become the early Guardians of the Galaxy. So the very first members of that team were himself, Star-Lord, Rocket Raccoon, and a few others who eventually left the team or died and no longer factored into the Guardians of the Galaxy, who are more prominent today. Groot's plant-based abilities are very similar to Swamp Thing's in having superhuman strength and durability, the ability to alter his body and grow different sections and appendages very quickly, as well as size alteration. He has been seen at various different sizes throughout the years, and he can attain a mammoth colossal size. He also has general plant control of any plants that happen to be in the vicinity. He can command them the same way Swamp Thing does. And he is very famed for being able to regrow from even the smallest cuttings. So he's actually been destroyed. His body has been destroyed several times in the comics, and as long as a single splinter is collected and planted, he can regrow himself anew. Another interesting fact about Groot is, though he is generally portrayed as being very limited in speech and only capable of saying, "I am Groot," that's not how he originally started out. When he was on the team in Annihilation Conquest of the early Guardians of the Galaxy, he actually had a full vocabulary, and he spoke complete sentences and was fully capable of carrying on conversations. It's believed that as a result of some of his subsequent destructions and regrowings, that he has lost the ability to speak those complete sentences, though in very recent comics, he has regained the ability to speak again. Groot has been a erstwhile member of the Guardians of the Galaxy ever since, and he is generally always found with his best friend Rocket Raccoon being his go-to backup in all of the adventures and situations that Rocket finds himself in. So having taken a look at these two characters, it's time to compare what would happen if they were to ever go one-on-one against each other to decide who is the better plant character. The winner's going to be Swamp Thing. When it comes to most of their powers, they are seemingly in relatively equal standing in terms of their strength, durability, body manipulation, size alteration, and their plant control of the various plants in the nearby vicinity. And we won't go into any notion of whether one would be able to use their plant control to control the other. Let's say that in that regard, those powers would cancel each other out, and neither could control or manipulate the other. But all of those other powers seem to be on fairly equal footing. The one real trump card that Swamp Thing has in his favor is his conscious projection, his ability to project his consciousness into whatever plant life happens to be around or anywhere that he wants to go to. This means that no matter what you do to his physical body, no matter how badly you damage or destroy it, he can just create a new one out of any plants that happen to be in the area and hop to it. Now, Groot can also come back from a body destruction, but it takes a long time. His ability to regrow from a splinter takes quite a while to achieve. So even though this could never be a definitive fight to the death between them, it can certainly be a fight to a conclusion where Swamp Thing, no matter what you do to him, will always be able to come back in a new body virtually immediately. Groot, his body gets destroyed down to just a collection of splinters. It's going to take time for someone to pick one of them up, plant it, care for it, and eventually grow a new Groot. So Swamp Thing is going to take the win out of his ability to continue the fight much longer than Groot would be able to. Swamp Thing in DC Comics takes the win of this grudge match. Let me know down below what you thought of the outcome of this fight, and as always, suggestions for future grudge matches. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on the next edition of Grudge Match.